there's a fair chance that I'm a better listener than you. That's not me bragging, that's just science. The best part is that you can become just as good of a listener as me, and possibly even better. Not only that, doing this hack is fun, rewarding, and will benefit more than just your listening skills, especially as you get older. Stay tuned to the end to find out more about that, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I can tell you what this hack is, we need to understand a little bit about why it works. To do that, let's talk a little bit about sound. The information that we need to know about this hack all relates to the aspects of sound such as timbre, pitch, timing, and loudness. You see, what defines each sound that we hear is a combination of those factors. That's actually still an oversimplification, but it's good enough for what we're talking about here. Let's start with timbre. When you hear a piano play a middle C note, the string vibrates 262 times every second to produce the main sound of that note, or what they call the fundamental frequency. When you hear a trumpet play that same middle C, the main sound or fundamental frequency from the trumpet is also 262 Hz, or 262 vibrations of air per second. In other words, both instruments are playing exactly the same note, with exactly the same frequency, but they don't sound the same. The reason for that is that instruments have different timbres. Timbre is the term used to describe the way that we differentiate different sounds. And what makes the timbre of a sound is its fundamental frequency, combined with all the additional harmonics that are created at the same time. There's a diagram here showing the different harmonics or resonant frequencies along with the fundamental frequency when we play something like a tuning fork, a trombone, and a clarinet. In each case, they're also all playing that middle C note, but the reason we hear each one as being different is all those other spikes that they create along with the fundamental frequency, or in the case of the tuning fork, the sounds they don't make in addition to the fundamental frequency. So that's timbre, and it's an important aspect of how we differentiate sounds. But it's not enough on its own, so let's talk a bit about timing and pitch. When we hear sounds in the real world or in recorded music, we're taking in a huge amount of information all at once without even realizing it. There's the range of frequencies we hear, but also the timing at which they're created and the timing and ways in which they change. That information tells us not just about the character of the sounds themselves, but also where they're positioned in space. So now let's take a sideways step for a moment and talk a little bit about the science that helps us understand what all this means inside the brain and within the auditory system. All of what I'm talking about in this video is discussed in much greater depth and detail in this book. It's called Of Sound Mind, and it's by Nina Kraus. I'll link it in the description down below for you. It's a very easy read, it's phrased in all very practical terms, and it's especially good in the written version where you get access to all the different diagrams and images throughout the book. Listening to it as an audiobook, ironically, is less ideal. What Nina Kraus explains in this book is how complex and how malleable our auditory systems are. They're actually much larger and more accurate than our visual systems. They're also not the one-way system that most of us think they are. Let me explain. What I mean by that is that we tend to think of sound arriving at the eardrum, being passed along the nervous system up to the brain, and then processed and perceived. However, studies have revealed that there's actually a lot of return pathways coming from the brain back out into the auditory system. They're less linear than the upstream pathways, and there's actually more of these downstream pathways than upstream pathways. That's right, the brain has more connections out to the auditory system than it receives coming in. It's something that's evident in more highly evolved creatures like humans than in more basic organisms. And it's a big part of how we've developed mental flexibility and the ability to learn. And that's the key. Learning. These outgoing connections from the brain help our auditory system to be selective about what we focus on and hear, to isolate sounds and focus on sounds of interest while excluding all of the noise. Basically, when we hear a sound, our brain gets a basic understanding of what that sound is, and then activates those outgoing auditory pathways and our other senses as well, such as sight, to further scrutinize the sounds that matter as necessary. And at this point, you might be getting an inkling of where we're headed in relation to critical listening. Before we move on though, let's quickly revisit what I said before about the accuracy of the auditory system being higher than that of the visual system. Our eyes are unable to detect flickers that are any faster than 60 Hz. In microseconds, that's a sensitivity of about 16,700 microseconds. Our visual system's ability to react to a new visual stimulus, like an object appearing in our field of view, is around about 150 to 200 microseconds. Our auditory system is able to detect differences in the arrival of sound waves at our ears, down to a difference of just 10 microseconds between the left ear and the right ear, or vice versa. There's further research outside the relevance of this particular topic that would suggest that our auditory system actually has timing accuracy as low as 2 to 4 microseconds of accuracy. And even further studies still would suggest that our brain can detect differences in timing that go beyond what we can actually even measure at this stage. But as I said, that doesn't relate specifically to this topic. That's for a different video. Subscribe and let me know in the comments if you want to see that content. All I will say for now is it has huge ramifications for audio reproduction. But let's get back to helping you hear things better. That insane accuracy in our auditory system is what allows you to pinpoint a sound in space. But it also helps us pick up very minute differences between some sounds. As an example, some languages use slight differences in the timing of vocalization of sounds to create different meaning. This is a bit like the differences between the sounds t and d in English, where the t is unvoiced, it's just the sound of air moving through my mouth, and the d is voiced, where I'm activating my voice in addition to the air moving through my mouth. It's how we understand the difference between a word like bill, which has a b, and pill, which has a p at the beginning. However, in some languages, that vocalization is a bit more complex, and given that it's just a fraction of a second required to make a sound like t or d, you start to realize how accurate the auditory system has to be, but also how adaptable. You see, if you only speak a language like English, you won't be able to differentiate certain sounds in a language like Hindi. And that's because Hindi contains what are called pre-voiced consonants, where the sound of the voice activates before the consonant arrives. We won't get into what they sound like because that's not relevant here, but what is important is that you won't be able to differentiate them right now. However, you can learn to with practice. Now, before you stop the video and assume that I'm just going to tell you to practice listening critically, it's important to know that no amount of critical listening practice will achieve what I'm about to share with you. I dare say it might also be less fun than what I'm going to suggest, and it definitely won't provide the additional benefits. As one of the headings within the book says all too clearly, you won't get fit by watching sports. Likewise, you won't get better at hearing by critically listening to music, even though that might sound like a form of practice. So what we know so far is that our hearing relies on many elements of sound to be processed and selectively isolated and focused on by our brain. This includes factors like the timing of sounds and the changes to those sounds, the frequencies that make up the sounds, the pitch of the sounds and the changes of pitch over time, and the loudness of sounds and the changes to loudness over time. We also know that timing and changes over time to the sound can include the onsets of sounds and the changes to sounds that occur within a fraction of a second. We also know that some people learn to be aware of certain sounds and other people don't. So how can you train your brain to get better at recognizing, understanding, and focusing on specific sounds within music, if not by practicing listening to music? Easy. Just start playing music. Being a musician is all it takes to actively remap the connections within your brain to significantly hear into the music and potentially therefore improve your enjoyment of the music. That's not all it will do, and the benefits are far-reaching, but we'll get to that very soon, just not quite yet. Science has shown that our brains develop what are called sensory maps within its structure. Basically, it allocates and organizes certain neurons in the brain to different and specific sensory inputs. These could be related to touch, taste, smell, sight, or hearing, and what's more, the more we use those senses, the more detailed and larger those sensory maps become. To leverage this power for yourself, all you need to do is start playing a musical instrument, and that includes singing. Specifically, what it means to be a musician is to actively play an instrument of some sort for about 30 minutes a few times a week. You don't have to be particularly good at it, and it doesn't matter what the instrument is. The key is that when you're playing the musical instrument As opposed to just listening to music, your brain is asked to pay attention to subtle details such as the timing of the music, the nuances of the pitch that you play or you sing and the adjustments you might choose to make, how that pitch then changes as you adjust the position of your fingers, your mouth or your body, and how you choose to modulate the sounds that you create as you initially learn the basics of creating the sounds, and then eventually start to inject your own emotion, nuances and inflections to the music you're playing. As you progress from feeling like a toddler taking their first steps to eventually being willing to have other people hear you play, your brain is expanding and refining your auditory cortex to become far more attuned to subtleties in sound that you never previously knew existed. As a great example, Nina Kraus describes in her book how her musician husband will hear the sound of a motorbike and he's noticing sounds that define the type of bike that it is, not just deciding if it's a motorbike or not. And you can probably relate to this if I show you a series of images, the images that represent things that you have a deep interest in and that you spent a lot of time focusing on, you will see details that others don't. It's no different at all when it comes to our hearing. And what all this does for us is amazing. Firstly, and obviously given the title of this video, playing a musical instrument is going to make you a better listener, more able to hear nuances and details in the music that previously were invisible to you. But perhaps even better than that is it's going to improve your auditory system overall, and that's got major benefits in real-world life. As we all know, our hearing declines as we age. Where that becomes particularly challenging is in noisy environments where you're trying to hold a conversation but you're only catching every third word. Well, not so much for musicians. And remember, that's just anybody that plays a musical instrument regularly. As a musician, your brain is able to turn down the noise more effectively and isolate the sounds that you want to pay attention to. You'll also get better at ignoring auditory distractions, which is great for both listening to conversations, but also for focusing on a specific sound or instrument in your favorite recordings. And on top of that, your auditory memory will also improve, which is going to make it easier to piece together a conversation in difficult situations. It's also going to make it easier for you to identify the subtle differences between two different recordings or two different pieces of equipment. Now, I should be clear here, playing a musical instrument is not going to negate the impact of hearing loss. We still need to protect our ears. And on top of that, a certain level of background noise is impossible for anybody to overcome. But just playing a musical instrument will definitely improve your chances of being able to understand your friend, your wife, your husband, next time you catch up for a drink or go out for a meal. And as we age, those benefits become even more valuable. Something else that's valuable is the fun that you'll be able to have playing a musical instrument, either alone or ideally with some friends. And remember, you don't have to be good. You just have to do it regularly. And so if you want to become a better listener, either when it comes to listening to music or when it comes to listening to your friends and family, then pick up your favorite musical instrument and start playing. If you like topics like this and you want to know more about our hearing and auditory systems, then check out my video up here next where I talk about the fact that we can actually somehow perceive sounds that are way beyond what we can consciously hear. To wrap this one up though, I want to say a huge thanks to channel members, to channel Patreon members, and to those of you that leave super thanks on videos like this one. And until next time, happy listening, happy music playing, be kind to each other, and I'll see you here again soon on Passion for Sound.